Welcome to Kraftwerk once again. The idea of this video is to maybe get some understanding of how to dial in a tone on your amp. I'm doing this on Amplitude, I'm putting this on the Amplitude series, but actually this translates into real life as well. The idea that you plug in your amp and turn up the gain and you've got a great sound is a bit nonsensical. So what I'm gonna do is just go through a few wee things. Firstly, I'm making another video straight after this, and that is about getting some good sounds out of your guitar, because one of the things that people forget is that the way the kind of tone is in your fingers, but it's more about how you play, what your guitar settings are, you know, how much volume you're putting through, what's your bass and tone level setting at, and all the different tones that you can actually get out of your guitar before you even worried about your amp settings. And also a quick discussion about passive and active amps. The three we've got here, the kind of basic ones, is Fender, Marshall, and Mesa Boogie, the kind of main three types that you could argue are around, you know. They're all passive. I think the SLO, which we could possibly add, has an active EQ, and what that means, guys, is very simple, is that on a passive EQ, when you turn the tone, all the tone knobs up, bass, mid and treble, then you've got basically unity, and so when you dial back you take away, so your tone pods only take away, they don't add. Whereas with an active volume of active EQ, you add. You can add and boost as well. For example, some of the Mesa Boogies which have the graphic equalizers, those graphic equalizers are active. So if I go above 0, I'm pushing the signal. I'm not going back to unity, I'm pushing the signal. And if I subtract, I subtract, kind of how most graphic equalizers work. But the majority of amps have their EQs as passive, which means that if you put everything up, although it's really trebly, that's what's coming through the circuits. And if I turn mine down, it goes away. So when you look at all your EQs on 12, you've cut every one of those by 12. The other thing that's really important is that every single amp and pedal and thing, they kind of all have a slight different EQ curve. Now you can look that up online, but if I have everything on 12, my Fender kind of standard deluxe kind of thing will have a slight dip in the mids, for example, around about 1,000, just a slight one. So it's bassy, cut, and trebly. Mesa Boogies, they tend to have quite a bit on the low end, and the mids. Marshalls are kind of like, you know, really high in the mids again to give that push in the lower mid to mids. So they all have a slightly different EQ curve. So when you stand in front of three different amps, like let's say a Fender, a Marshall, and the Boogie, when you are turning the EQs, they will have different effects on it, and you will be sweeping, not sweeping, but you'll cutting different frequencies in the bass, treble, bass, mid and treble with all the different amps. They all have their own region that they kind of act upon from amp to amp. So remembering that means that you can't necessarily dial in the same tone with a Marshall that you do on a Mesa Boogie, because where they have decided the frequency range for the bass knob and the frequency range for the mid and the treble, where they are is slightly different. Also, the way that the different EQs interact with one another influence the others, and they influence each other differently. And then there's also the difference between, is your EQ in your preamp or is it past your preamp and it's actually before your power amp, etc., etc. And then you've got the added complication of the presence, which isn't actually a tone at all. It brings back kind of like overall mids back into the signal, returning roughly from the power amps and the speaker. A bit complicated. The CS guitars has got a much better explanation. Anyway, So they all react differently. The other thing that I also think is missing a lot of the time is that people nowadays tend to do a lot of playing in their houses, and so if you think about an amp that is rated 50 watts, 100 watts, even 30 watts, especially if it's a valve amp, they are loud as fuck. And that means that the whole design of this amp is to be played loud. That means the speaker configuration, the frequencies that the speaker likes to respond to, how loud the power amps or how heavy the power amps want to be glowing, all these things are set to a kind of a higher volume. So getting kind of shittier tones in your bedroom is not unusual, because they're not made to be played quietly. You get amps that are for bedroom use, and then you get amps that are for proper use. So if you're struggling to get your amps to play a decent sound, there's a lot of factors that could be going on here. I think one of the main factors that people struggle with nowadays is that they're playing their amps too quiet. They're not pushing the items, especially the speaker and the power tubes, as they should. So another wee story. I mean, years ago I was working, and a guy, a really accomplished rock guitarist, older gentleman at the time, he was in his 50s, and I saw him play once in a pub just here where we stay, and I was like blown away, because this guy just had a Marshall JCM 800, and it's 4x12 cab, and a Gibson, and fuck all else, right? And the tone he got out of that thing was immense. But he worked with me, so I was talking to him about it, and he says, these young kids today, they don't know. Now, this was 20 years ago, roughly. These young kids, they don't know how to set up amps. They just everything on full and go for it. And I was like, okay. And the more you get clued up on recording and guitar and amps and all the stuff, the more you realize how much truth is in there. You really can set your tone between your guitar and your amp if you are a little bit thoughtful about what you're trying to do. The other really important thing is there is absolutely no need to drive your amp to the gain, the distortion over the top. Most of the time the distortion is too much. When you play live, you can probably get away with it, but when you're recording, you probably nearly always have to dial that distortion back just a little bit, even on the best amp, so you get the really heavy distortion, singing distortion that you want, but then you probably have to dial it back just a wee bit, and it just opens it up a bit. It gives a bit of clarity, gets rid of all that white noise and fuzz that it creates. So nothing to do but let's get the Fender going. So the Fender, I actually have an OCD in front. I'm going to put that on in a minute, and I want to show what a beautiful tone you can get with it. Fender and a good distortion pedal and a 4x10. So this is a fairly nice this is an Epiphone Les Paul 1960s Tribute Plus with the PAFs, and it does the job. Just switch these off. Getting some pops and clicks. So I always switch the spring, the reverb off, because the reverb is like I can play shit in the reverb will kind of like blanket it over. So fuck the reverb for now. First things first, in Amplitube I turn the volume up. I want Amplitube to do what it attempts to do, which is model the whole way that the power amps are struggling under the volume, and get a bit saggy and beautiful and create some overtones. And generally speaking, I get rid of the presence completely. The presence is the last thing on my list. Reverb gone, amp nice and loud. Quickly check where my with my levels on my speaker. So I've got my dynamic and my condenser. This is a ribbon. Now remember, I've got hardly any EQ coming through. So what I'm doing now is the first thing I'm going to do is go for the bass. And I'm going to turn the bass up just before it gets flubby. And then I'm going to bring in some mids. Now my controls on my guitar are all on full for now. Now I'm going to bring the treble in. And you'll see how they interact with one another now that I've brought the treble up. Now the mids are getting a bit funny. And because the mids are up a bit, my bass can probably be turned down a bit. Now that I can see roughly what the ratio is, the treble is on 5/6, mids on 5, bass is on 4, I can push this a little bit. I can push the EQ up a bit, keeping to that same ratio, so pull them all up just a tad. Okay with that, but now I can start pushing in the presence. Point of this exercise is that you don't have to go and, you know, make drastic movements. Now I'm going to switch on my OCD, and again I'm going to take the drive all the way down. And what I'm looking for is looking for a real good drive sound with clarity. Got a bit of bass in the bottom. Still think that we can get rid of a bit of the mids. Now something that I didn't show at the moment was that I'm actually constantly looking at the levels coming in and out. Okay, so I'm cool with that, right? So I can now introduce a tad of spring reverb. One of the reasons I put the OCD in front is because the OCD works really well with your dynamics. So if I turn my my tone control down to about 5. Already get a nice tone, and if I take my volume down, I can clean up my signal a bit. And if I now start introducing my other pickups, I usually have this one up, this one down. So that gives you a really nice idea of what you can do just with the guitar. And this was fairly quick. Now you can spend a bit more time, because now you can start thinking about, okay, well, what kind of speaker do I want to use? Do I want to have any sort of after effects where I go and I EQ a little bit more of the low flubber out, or I get a little bit of the EQ, the nice graphic equalizer, and maybe notch some high points out just to clean things up. But the bass amp is now already fixed up and nicely done. So let's go to the Marshall. Now I'm choosing this Marshall here because it's actually not the one from the... This is a standard one, and this is what they used to say, yeah? Everything on fucking 10. The reason I'm putting this on 10 is because I want to show you why they said that. It's because it's a passive equalizer, so when you put it on 10, you basically let everything right through. So if I start, let's see what my levels are like. I might have to gain this down. But that's too much. But the same thing applies. Let's turn them all down. Oh, I've got an OCD running, no wonder. You'll see why I put the OCD in. So let's get them all down. Get the mids up. See, it's getting some clarity in the mids. The mids here are much higher up the frequency scale than in, for example, the Fender. Now we're looking for nice tones. We're not looking for gent tones or Metallica tones or anything. We're looking for nice, clean, full drive sounds. I don't want to say rock. I'm looking for good, clean drive sounds from where you can then carry on. So I'm going to push this up a bit. If I put a little bit of treble in there, we're starting to get there. Now we just also like to have it in such a state that the distortion is not so much that if I do pull the volume back, I do get some dynamics. And now we're going to take the OCD and take the drive all the way down and use it like a... I think the OCD is better than the Tube Screamer for the purpose of a Tube Screamer, which is punching the mids a bit and dropping out the bottom. So we can get a little bit rid of a little bit of the fizz, because I don't like the fizz. So we'll drop the treble a bit and bring the spring reverb back. Too much. There you are. that's a half decent sound. Easy peasy. Now let us have a look at the Meister Boogie. The messes I feel are a little bit trickier. Again, we've got a really messy. We're gonna start again with having get the clean tone in. I think the messes are fine to use by themselves. You don't need to go into using any drive pedals. But this is the clean channel. The bass is always too high. The mids are too high, in my opinion. The presence is a bit too high. And put the gain up. Here that boom is always, the bottom end is always too much. I really like channel 2, which is the, I think sometimes the blue channel, sometimes the orange channel. Now this is on the modern setting, and the modern, I don't think it's necessary. We'll go to the vintage, and we do the same thing again. We get the gain up, get the master up, presence down, and this time we start with the treble with the Mesa Boogies. And the reason is weird. Apparently the Mesa Boogies, the EQ chain goes treble, mid, bass first, and then goes further, and not like the most, they go bass, mid, treble. So what we're gonna do is get some treble. Bass starts getting a little bit of a bite, and you'll notice how little bit of the bass in the mids you actually need. See how bassy the mids are, really? It's a bit too much. You've already got a lot of bass boom in there. So we'll put the presence up. The tricks with Mesa Boogies is actually, because they're so bottom boomy and it sounds amazing in the room, but on the recording and live it can get overwhelming. The trick to them actually is to use different cabs, Black Star, and that's why a lot of people put Marshall cabs in front of them, not the oversized slanted and things like that, because they are a little bit too much in the bottom. But here we are already, a really nice gain sound. And again, we can actually clean it up a bit. Now it gets funkier, because if you now really want it to sing, then we can say, okay, well, here's a drive pedal. With the Boogie, I would suggest getting an equalizer pedal out and get a little bit heavy-handed with the really low frequencies, because they build up. And in this case, I'm not going to put a reverb in, but I am going to go back into the room, choose a venue, and put a little bit of room back. So that, my friends, is that for this kind of education session, I say. I did this literally because a lot of people are complaining they can't get nice sounds out of Amplitube. And I thought to myself, well, I think a lot of people don't know how to get good sounds out of amps in the first place. It sounds different in the room. You got to remember that your ears are tricking you. If I've got the amp in the room, it just sounds wonderful. Now, no matter what I do, if I play through a VST, I am hearing the recorded version of that amp, and it's completely different having the amp in the room to listening back on a recording. But it is essentially what we're listening to, is we are listening to a recording, because it gets processed and it's coming through speakers. So we can't expect to have that same interaction and feeling and association with the amp that's playing. So a lot of people assume that the amp doesn't sound right, and they're probably right to a degree, but if you've got good monitors and playing loud with your VST, and you have, like mine, there's hardly any lag here. If I play, it feels like I'm playing through my amp. It is a case of put your mind in that perspective, that you are listening to a recording if you are playing through Amplitube. So, but with this process of actually trying to understand what the EQ does and slowly but surely dialing in your tone, I think you can get to any tone convincingly. What actually sparked this one off was people who want to play kind of blues, kind of crunchy, dynamic, bluesy kind of stuff, like Mark Knopfler type stuff, and really pull out those tones. And they're possible, they really are. I just did a quick experiment. In fact, I'm gonna go back to my Fender here, and there's a live show where he plays Brothers in Arms, which is just such an amazing guitar tone, but it's actually better on that live show somewhere in Switzerland. And he's got a Gibson Les Paul, and he's actually went through how we achieved that tone, and if you go through it, it's actually not that difficult. So number one is he's on the top. That's number one. He's got a bit of this drive going on the amp. So let's get rid of that for now. I can't play it anymore. I got that tone by having both on. Dialing this one down, so that's the both pickups at the same time. Bass and treble down. The tone knob down. And then get a little bit of drive going. When it comes to playing like this, I can't even do it. That's really in your fingers. So you're pushing the amp, but you're kind of starving it from a lot of information at the same time, because you're rolling back your volume and you're rolling back your tone knob. So you are really kind of starving it a bit. So sorry, the camera went off. So you get that tone by having the amp really driven, but you're also starving it from a lot of information coming from the pickups. So that is it for this lesson. Thank you very much. Take care.